Hey, it's Sean Price with the Home Team Group, and today we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of working with builders in new construction. All right, so the first thing that has to be said is, and this is in huge print right here, do not contact or visit a new build or a new builder without your realtor. And the reason for this is because most of the builders have a policy that if you walk into their facility, or if you call them and schedule an appointment and your realtor was not with you, then they claim procuring cause and they will not pay your realtor's commission, which would mean that you would either have to go unrepresented, which we're going to talk a lot about in this video, or you would have to cover your realtor's commission yourself. So do not go and schedule your appointment. Do not walk through the site and sign in. Do not make contact to a new build without having your realtor there. All right, and this also applies for a lot of builders. It doesn't. They won't even accept you just bringing in a business card. You need to have your representative physically there with you. Working with a builder, there's a lot of benefits to it, and there are a lot of negatives to it. I'm gonna go through the benefits here real quick. So the first benefit is you're getting a brand new home. So you know that you're getting, your mechanicals are all going to be new. Your HVAC, your water heater, all of your appliances are going to be new. Your roof is going to be brand new. Now, granted, a lot of the mechanicals and the appliances are going to be builder grade unless you pay for the upgrades, but at least you know they're new and they're covered by the warranty. So you get a builder warranty, and you get the warranties on all of your appliances and so on. The other benefit to it is that the homes are now built up to current code, so a lot of these homes are going to be more energy efficient. So there are some benefits to doing this. Now, there are a lot of negatives to working with a builder as well, or disadvantages. First thing is you have a lack of representation. If you don't go in with your realtor, you do have a lack of representation, and I'll explain to you what that means as we go through this process. You're going to be expected to provide a higher than normal deposit than what you would pay on the resale market. You're going to have a lack of protections for those deposits, and I'm going to go into the details on all of this. You're going to pay premium pricing. You're paying full retail for this property, and if you don't lock in the prices, that price can go up as building materials if they change and become more expensive. Also, you're going to have a limited selection, and you're going to have rising costs after the contract is signed. You won't know what those full costs are before you sign the contract. Questionable closing dates, especially in today's market. Some market conditions, there can be material shortages, or there can be construction delays due to weather, and these can all move your closing date, which can have a significant effect as well. And then you're living in a construction zone. Depending on where you are in the development, if you're one of the first to build and move in, then you're going to be living around other houses that are being built, and there's some negatives that go along with that. All right, so before we go any further with this, I want to make it very, very clear that this is not a negative video on working with builders. It's just you need to understand the pros and the cons, because what happens when you go in to a new build office, the sales office, you'll have what feels like a customer service rep. You'll have somebody who feels like they are working for you and helping you establish what you want. And in a lot of ways they are. But it's very important to understand that sales rep does not represent you. That sales rep does not represent your best interest. That sales rep's job is to sell you a house, and their job is to represent the seller. And so what that means is that they don't have any confidentiality requirements with you. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to you. They don't have a requirement or a responsibility to share any of the negatives with you. Their job is to sell that house. And of course, when you're selling something, you're going to give all the positives. So this is why it's really important that when you're doing this, you either understand every detail of the contract, understand every detail of what you're doing, or you have a qualified realtor that knows how to work with new construction, that knows the ins and outs of it, and knows how to protect your best interests as much as possible, and also knows how to explain to you where your risks are, because it is not the representative's job to explain to you where your risks are. So that's a lot of what this video is going to be about. So for example, let's say that you're sitting in a sales office and the properties are beginning at $799,000. And let's say that there are no appraisals or no comps within that area that support a $799,000 price point. It is not that agent's job to tell you that. It's only that agent's job to tell you what the asking price is. And you're going to see as we go through this process where the appraisal becomes very important. So, they don't have to tell you that there are no comps that are going to support this value. They don't have to tell you that they're depending on their comps to be the supporting value for your property that you're about to build and commit to. And if their comps don't support it, then you don't have that appraisal protections. It's not their job to tell you. That's our job as your buyer's agent to tell you that and explain this to you. It's not their job to explain to you the loss of your financing contingencies, the loss of an inspection contingency, the fact that there are no negotiations, all of these different things that happen in new construction that don't happen in the resale market. It's not their job to explain those things to you. If you know the questions to ask and you ask them, they do have to be honest with you, but they don't have to disclose it and bring it up to you. So you're going to have a lot of risks and a lot of exposure that, unless you are represented, you may not be aware of. And again, it's their job to sell the house and not look out for you. Okay, so first thing, when you go in and you pick a house and you pick a lot and you sign a contract, you're going to have to provide them with a deposit. That deposit is basically your earnest money deposit. Now, every transaction has an earnest money deposit, whether it's a resale or a new construction. The difference is in resale, the typical earnest money deposit is between 3 and 5%. It can go higher if you want to make your offer stronger, and that's a whole other subject. But typically, it's going to be between 3 and 5%. Sometimes as low as 1%, depending on the value of the property. I have seen, working with new builds, I've seen earnest money deposits as high as 10%. So what does that mean? That means if you are going in and you're looking at a $799,000 house, you're going to give them a $79,000 check at the time that you sign that contract. That is your earnest money deposit. Okay, so that's really important to understand. Even if you are, let's say, using a VA loan and you have 100% financing, or you're using an FHA loan and you have 3% or 5% financing, whatever your financing is, they're still going to require that 10% deposit if that's their policy. And you'll just get the refund back when you settle. But there's a lot of risk involved with that, which I will explain. When you're working with a new build, you do lose protections for your earnest money deposit, and we're going to go into a lot of detail with that. Okay, so lack of deposit protections. When you work with a new build, your financing contingency is really not as protective as it would be in the resale market. And I'm kind of hesitant to how I say that, because I've worked with builders that do allow a financing contingency and worked with builders that don't. The builders that did allow a financing contingency, they allowed a 30-day finance contingency, which is great because that gave the buyer time to go through the pre-approval process, go through underwriting, and make sure that they could qualify for the loan, at least at the time of signing the contract. And if they found out within that 30 days they couldn't qualify, they could cancel the contract and get their money back. So that is that situation where they were allowed a 30-day financing contingency. Now, that was only 30 days. The house wasn't going to be delivered to them for 9 months. So that 30-day financing, that pre-approval that they got on in that first 30 days does not apply when the settlement date comes. All that did was let them know that right now at this time they are qualified for this house at the base price. There's a lot of things that go into what could change in that 9-month delivery period, or 6-month delivery period, or even a 3-month delivery period. If you're not being delivered the home within 30 days of signing the contract and have that financing contingency, then that contingency does not protect your money beyond that point. So what does this mean? This means basically that if you get to the point where it's time to settle on the house, and if interest rates have gone up, or if your job situation has changed, or if you for some reason have added too many things to the house and the price has gone too high, you're either going to have to come up with those differences in cash, or you will not be able to settle and you will lose your earnest money deposit, which, remember, is higher than what it would be on the resale market. It could be up to 10%. Okay, so that's the financing contingency. Interest rates, typically a lender can only lock interest rates for about 60 days. So if you're beyond that 60-day time frame and interest rates go up, then what you could qualify for at this point may not be true later, depending on how high those interest rates go up, because there's debt to income ratio factors and all kinds of different factors with that. We did have one builder that we were working with, and we were able to get their rates locked in for 6 months for the buyer. But due to construction delays, which is another negative we'll talk about, due to construction delays, that construction is still ongoing, and we're 9 months out. So that rate lock is gone. So that builder or that buyer is potentially dealing with higher interest rates. So these are certainly things to have to keep in mind, because if you can't qualify for the loan, you don't have that contingency to protect you, and you lose your earnest money deposit, or that 10%, however much it was. The other thing that you lose are construction delays. I just spoke about that. Rising costs during selection periods. So we're going to go into this, but when you are going through and selecting the customization aspects of your new build, your costs are going to go up. Your base price includes a certain kind of countertop. Well, if you want a nicer countertop, like the one that's in the model that probably sold you on the house in the first place, you're going to pay more for that. If you want extra doors or an extra light switch, it gets down to the handles that are on the hardware that's on your cabinets and so on. All of these things have increased costs, so your price is going to go up. Whatever you sign that contract for, that's that contract price, but that's not the buy price at the end. That price will go up unless you just take the basic model home, which rarely happens. Okay. Also, there's no appraisal contingency. So I was talking about this previously. If the house doesn't appraise for the price that you have for the sales price, and not even just the base price, but for the sales price, once you put in all your selections and made all your upgrades, if the house doesn't appraise for that amount, you have to come out of pocket to pay the difference. So let's say you have a $799,000 house that you bought, and that's your base price, and let's say you end up putting about $75,000 in upgrades, so now you're up to about $875,000. Let's say the appraised value comes back at $825,000. Well, now you've got to pay that $50,000 out of pocket, because with a new build, there's no room for negotiations. What you sign on that contract is what you've got. So you don't have that appraisal contingency. So if it comes up short, you come out of pocket for that difference, or you lose your entire deposit that you put down at the beginning. The appraisal has several factors. It has market conditions, it has surrounding homes and what those have sold for. A lot of it has to do with the appraiser himself. A lot of these builders, they do have appraisers they work with, so they feel comfortable that they're going to get the appraised value, but there's no guarantee on that. We have had a situation where we were looking at some new builds out in Manassas, and the sales office, when we were in there talking to the sales rep, the new build was going to cost about $775,000. Well, there were resales in that development that were the exact same model of what we were looking at for $775,000 that were a year old that were selling for $675,000. And those are now comps for that new build. So that new build very likely will not appraise for $775,000. So those are things you have to keep in mind. Those are factors that you do not have that protection on your earnest money deposit. Okay. Changes in market conditions and no comps. And here's a factor that's really important, why it's really important that you have a realtor representing you. The sales agent for the builder is not going to run comps for you. Now, if they see a property that kind of supports their price, they're going to absolutely point that out to you to try to sell you on the value. But that doesn't mean that is the actual appraised value. You have to do a detailed comp analysis to make sure of what the appraised value is going to be. The sales rep for the builder will not do that. That's not their job. You need to have your representative, your realtor, that has that fiduciary responsibility for you to go and make sure those comps support the price point of what you're looking at. All right, and there's no inspection contingency. Now, they probably won't bring this up to you. You can ask for, and your realtor should do this for you, ask for a pre-drywall inspection. And you have an inspector that you trust come in, and what they'll do is they'll inspect the property before the drywall is put up, so they can look and make sure that everything is where it needs to be. So we do this as a regular practice with our clients. One of the things you have to understand, though, is when you're doing that drywall inspection, you have no negotiations. So if there's something that they have done in the construction of the home that that you don't necessarily like, or that your inspector says, that's not, we don't really like the way that's done, you don't have the right to negotiate that. You just can see what's going on. It's kind of for informational purposes only. The only thing that you really have a right for is to making sure that things are up to code. So, making sure that all the requirements of coding are met. And that's a good thing to have, but just understand it's not like you can go through and pick and choose and negotiate other things outside of that. You just can make sure that the house is being built to code. All right, pre-drywall inspection, there we go. All right, so premium pricing. When you are buying a brand new home, brand new construction, you are paying full retail at the price point of, you're paying, there's no discounts there. You cannot negotiate this, and you're paying top dollar for this property. The other thing to think about is a lot of builders will offer a price lock for you on the building materials. So when let's say you get that property for $799,000, that's your base price, you'll lock in the price of those building materials that are in that base house. So if prices start going up, your construction costs don't necessarily go up. Now, when you go in and make your selections, it's going to go up for those aspects, but the general things do not change. So for example, the lumber and so on. But if the builder does not offer you that price lock, or if you lose the documentation that documents what your price lock was in the situation where the builder does offer that, in either of those situations, if prices start going up, you're paying the current construction prices. So your base house could start elevating, and we've seen this a lot with COVID, because we've had such a break in the chain of supply that prices have been going up pretty significantly. Roofing materials, lumber, windows, doors, all of these things, the prices have increased. So if you didn't have that price lock, that $799,000 house could cost you another 20-30% just at the base price. So it's important to make sure that you have that price lock. Let's see, I'm hitting all these points. There's no room for negotiations. Again, when you're working with a builder, there's not a negotiation process involved here. All right, let's see. Can take long. Okay, so if you're paying this premium price, and if you're paying top dollar for the property, then it's going to take you longer to build equity in the property. So what that means is basically, you're going to need to stay in the home 3 to 5 years before you're at a break-even point where you actually have a little bit of you've made up for your closing costs and so on, to where you have a little bit of equity in the property. So that's something to keep in mind as well. All right, when you go through the selection process to customize your home, this is something we've seen a lot of frustration with our buyers. They've experienced a lot of frustration with this. So you sign the contract, you give them your earnest money deposit, and once you've done that, then you begin the selection process of your materials. So you don't necessarily know what your countertops are going to be and what your cabinets are going to be and so on, because if you're looking at the model home, a lot of times the model home is built with the top end stuff. So if you think you're getting what's in the model home for that base price, it's not happening. So you're going to go into a selection process. Well, when you go in the selection process, there's a limited number of selections that you have for your countertops. There's a limited number of cabinetry that you can choose from. There's a limited number of flooring options that you can choose from. And so you have this limited option, and those options are often provided at a price point that is much higher than what it would be on the regular market. So you're pigeonholed into certain options, and those price points are going to be higher than what you would pay outside. On top of that, that's going to increase the price that you're paying for the house. So you've got to really make sure you're keeping track of everything that you're adding to the house and the cost that you're adding, because those costs add up very, very quickly. And this can be important in the financing. So the cost of the home is going to increase as you're going through the selection process. The selections are going to be limited to the builder offerings. And this is everything down to, like I said, the hardware and the cabinetry, the door hardware, the types of doors, the trim throughout the house, just what kind of cabinet facings you want, countertops, bathrooms, everything. As time goes on in the construction process, a lot of times these materials can become more and more expensive. So you want to make these selections and get them locked in as quickly as possible, but the builder controls when that selection process happens. During the time that you are going through this, some of the hidden costs are going to be those facts that you're adding this stuff in. There's also could be the rising cost of the building materials. Additional items that you don't really think of, such as landscaping. Sometimes landscaping is not included in the base price, so that's going to be something that's going to sneak up on you. Decks are typically not included in the base price, so that's going to sneak up on you. Blinds, window treatments, things along those lines. Those can get expensive if you have 30, 40 windows throughout a house and you have to put blinds in each house or each window. That's expensive. When you're on the resale market, these things are already included. You already see what you're getting with that. Also, another hidden cost could be that your interest rates on the financing could increase, like we've talked about. And then you've got the HOA fees, you've got property taxes. These are all things that we don't really you don't really know what those are going to be in the end because they're variable costs that will happen as the builds happen. All of these costs can also affect your financing qualifications. So again, you have a $799,000 house that you've signed for. Now your costs are up to $899,000. You've got to qualify for that loan, and if the interest rates have gone up, your buying power goes down, so there's a little bit of a challenge there. You may not be able to qualify for your loan. So these are things you have to keep in mind. All right. Questionable closing date. So there are things that are out of the builder's control, things like weather, things like supply chain issues, so on and so forth. So the closing date, you can have a projected closing date, and sometimes that closing date can be pushed out. For example, at the time of this video, we have closing days being pushed out by 2, 3, 4 months because of COVID and so on. But this can of course lead to higher interest rates on your financing and make qualifying for that loan more difficult. And I keep talking about qualifying for the loan because this is really, really important, because if you don't qualify for that loan at the time of settlement, whether it's because of appraisal or it's because of increased cost or increased interest rates or change in your circumstance, you lose your earnest money deposit. This is really, really important that you understand there is no protection on that earnest money deposit. Other things with the closing date that could be challenging is the logistics of moving. If you're in a lease, for example, and you're waiting you have a certain closing date and you try to schedule that to where when your lease ends, and then the closing date gets pushed back a couple months, if the owner won't let you extend that lease month to month, you might have to sign another year lease, which could cause increased costs on the back end of that. It just makes it more challenging to figure out what you're going to do. Are you going to put things in storage for the interim? How are you going to logistically work that out? The longer that the house is under construction, the longer you're exposed to either increased market rate or increased interest rates, or also to market changes. If the market starts to soften, if the market starts to shift a little bit, property values, the appreciation starts to slow down, you may not get that appraisal valuation that you need. So the longer that closing date goes, the more exposed you are there as well. All right, so you're going to be living in a construction zone. Depending on when you buy the property, you're going to be living in a construction zone, so you're going to have construction materials around. The development may not be completely finished. You're going to have immature landscaping. A lot of the trees are going to be young, so you're not going to have that fully developed, mature neighborhood feel. There's just a lot of potential negatives with that you have to keep in mind. Also, you don't know if you're early in the process, you don't know what the other neighbors' homes are going to look like. We've been in some developments locally where you have two houses next door to each other that have the exact same color and the exact same elevation. They basically look like identical houses. Builders that we've worked with have been pretty good about making sure that doesn't happen, but you don't know for sure until everything comes up. So those are things you have to keep in mind as well. Okay, so these are the factors that you have to keep in mind. I'm going to give you some real world scenarios. We had a buyer that went into a $1.6 million house. That property is now costing them $1.8 million just because of the upgrades and everything. So that does happen. They've been very responsible. They know the amounts, they know the totals, and so on. The challenge that we had with this buyer was that they got a 30-day financing contingency. And the builder offered some incentives for them to use the in-house lender that they work with for that financing contingency. So the buyer went through the process, put in all of her documents to get the pre-approval for that, to make sure at that time of purchasing the house that she could qualify for that loan. And as we got close to the end of that finance contingency, we still hadn't gotten the pre-approval letter. And the pre-approval letter is basically, it's called a conditional approval letter. And basically it means they've done all the underwriting, they've done everything that needs to be done. They've qualified the buyer, they've qualified the assets, they've qualified everything that needs to be qualified, and they will fund the loan. All that needs to be done is find the property. Okay, so that's what you want as a good solid pre-approval. And they weren't providing this letter. And so we started, kind of talking to the lender and harassing him, saying, "Hey, we need this pre-approval letter." And he was like, "Oh, that's fine. The builder will take our word for it. We're going to give the pre-approval letter. It's fine." And they weren't actually going to do the underwriting. They were just going to give the pre-approval letter. And because we were working with this buyer, and because Kelly is a lender, and because we knew the processes, we had to really push that lender to actually go through the underwriting process. So little details like this are issues that you have to be aware of. Even if you do get a financing contingency, if you don't know how the process works, you may not even be protected there. Okay. This buyer very well could have just issued that letter, and maybe the buyer had something in their history or something, debt to income ratio or something where they couldn't qualify, and they would have lost the $80,000 deposit that they put down from day one. So you've got to really have those protections in place. We already talked about the development out in Manassas, as far as like the appraisals for the new build, and the fact that we did the comps to see that market was not going to support the price of the new build. The builder's agent is not going to tell you these things. So it's really, really important that you have a representative that's with you. You have a realtor that represents you, and they are with you in the entire process. It's really important that they go through and they explain all of these details, all of these risks, all of these exposures, so that you can go in with your eyes wide open and know exactly what you're doing. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and I hope you found this helpful.